would say that we have two experts and myself. And so I would say 2 years ago I was able to spell CTE but didn't know too much about it. And so after a 2-year extensive visioning process, I think we have a very exciting proposal for you. So this evening, as Cindy said, I'm joined by Dr. Joan Bludorn, who's our director of CTE, and Katie Hazley, who is our Assistant Director of Current Technical Education. And what we're going to talk with you about for the next 15 minutes or so is an overview of our visioning work together, as well as some recommendations and proposals as we look forward to the 18-19 school year and beyond.
Thank you, Mark. I have to give some of the kids credit that are on these slides. So this is Avery Mitzel, and she is a medical anatomy student from Broomfield. We started this process with even just putting our mission together a couple of years ago with Arapahoe campus, empowering students through rigorous academic and technical skills for college and career readiness. And we feel like it really nails what we do at our campus. Nice little shot of 50 years ago. Most of you know that we just celebrated 50 years at our building of career and tech ed. That's a picture of the old vocational education, and most of you remember that terminology. Noted that of the 50 years that we've had that building over there, the last 20, although the school district has funded the programming, we have not had anything new or innovative added in the last 20 years. Note. Our vision started about 2 years ago when Mark was just learning how to spell CTE. And we had over 500 folks participating in that process, in coming together and giving us input. We had surveys, we had parents. It was a pretty long process, and in this last few months we've really fine-tuned it and had a committee that worked specifically with how we would move forward. In that photo, I know you may not be able to see the students, but we have Isaiah Seymour. He was from Centaurus High School. We have J.C. Baca and Kaylee Kennard, who are from my campus. And then also tonight, right before the session started, I had a student from the audience, Nico, is a student at Southern Hills. He's a 7th grader, and he's here for Boy Scouts. And just getting his input, he said, how can I help with this little interview that he did right before this meeting tonight? And I said, tell me what you want to do in life, what you want your career to be. And he said, engineering. And I said, we will take care of that for you. The visioning, in the visioning process, we've had numerous, did I go too far, guys? Community members of that 500. I'm sorry, I didn't know I needed to click for these. Students, parents, CTE employees, middle and high school counselors, principals, administrators, and community partners. And then within our community, we had Ames, we had Emily Griffith, the board have been participating in some of our meetings. Front Range, and you can see there's others there listed. Something that has come to kind of the forefront of this work has been that we've added our 15 middle schools. The work is becoming pretty lofty. I mean, there's a lot to be done. And so at this time in my career, I am going to step away from being the director of the Technical Education Center, and I'm going to focus completely on being the principal of the Arapahoe Ridge High School, which, Donna, you maybe remember those days. So it's a pretty awesome time with the timing that we have with the work we've been doing to really launch CTE into the 21st century and really make it a world-class programming. And Katie's going to take it from here and Marcus, I'm sorry, and show us next steps.
So much of the work that we've done was rooted in data and research, and we used a consensus process to review data, really take a look at our program goals, and most importantly, develop a vision for our future. And we did that by looking at a number of data sets, and a lot of that included talking with older workforce and looking at both state, local, and national data. we made sure that we aligned our programs to meet job demands, and so we engaged a lot of our community partners in the area. We talked with secondary institutions. We looked at exemplars, so certainly the most successful career tech ed programs nationally. And what we learned was that we will do our students the most justice if we offer programs where there are jobs, and in industries that are thriving as well as emerging. And so we want to make sure that we're prepared. We're well into the 21st century, and so we want to offer 21st century and beyond programming, not 20th century programming.
Yeah.
We want to make sure we honor ICAP information, and that's the programming and that's the planning that our high school students do to prepare for post-secondary career and college readiness. And then again, we want to look at workforce readiness skills. So all those really help to inform the direction that we took as we took a look at our visioning. Other factors that guided our decisions a lot was economic indicators. Is there growth in these industries? Can kids actually make a living wage doing this and do it well? What is the future? What does career employment look like in these areas? Again, is this a growing industry or is it one on the decline? Are there pathways beyond high school? So a lot of these transcend the experiences here that our kids will receive at Arapahoe campus. Are there pathway opportunities to not only give kids the experiences, but also get them a foot into the door as they move forward? And then quality of life and economic security. Again, we want our kids to be successful beyond. And so we took a look at all of these indicators as well. Student interest. We surveyed students. Our students take surveys, and we looked at to see where their interest is and align that with a lot of the economic indicators as well. We looked at partnership opportunities. Key success for career and technical education is allowing students to move outside the classroom and work in apprenticeships and internships and actually get their hands dirty and really get to experience what it's like to work so beyond the classroom. And of course, colleges and universities and businesses. And so we see many students taking a pathway right into the workforce, and we see other students taking a pathway into college and universities. And we want to make sure that our programs are responsive to that and give them those opportunities. So our promise is to provide and that's a strong word, but every Boulder Valley School District with a world-class career and technical education that prepares them for today's job market and their futures. And so even though we have the Boulder Tech Center just right over here on this campus, this touches every one of our high schools and our middle schools, and quite honestly, we're looking at opportunities at our elementary schools as well. We really want to make sure that kids are aware of what's going on. We offer some world-class CTE programs at our home high schools as well. So even though this presentation is talking about the Arapahoe campus, it transcends that because, quite honestly, this is a district PK-12 commitment. So there are challenges, of course. As Joan talked about early on, we want to move away from this notion of vocational technical to career and technical education. And so this includes core academic content. Kids can actually earn content in their core academic classes, English and math and art, and they can also earn college credit as well. We're looking at in-demand technical skills, and again, as I talked about before, a good transition, a seamless transition to either higher education or employment or both. Another challenge is that we've been historically underfunded in BVSD. I think our schools and administration do a masterful job doing as much as they can with the resources that are available, and that's great. But resources are super important, and so we want to be great stewards with dollars, and we want to make sure that when we invest in programs that we're investing in the right programs and that we can get huge capitalization on what we're doing and what we're spending our money on. And finally, career preparation, I talked about this, must begin at younger grades. It's not relegated through 9 through 12. And so as we talk about some of the programs that Katie will be talking about in a minute, it's really getting kids interested, satiating their appetite in middle school, but also taking a look at elementary interest as well. So we've identified needs at both our high school and middle level program. At the high school program, it's a seamless transition, again, as I talked about, from education or employment in today's workforce, and aligning our career and technical education with new graduation guidelines. Later today, we'll be talking about the graduation requirements of 2021, but we want to make sure that these programs align with the graduation guidelines. We want to provide multiple pathways to graduation. These could include capstones, work-based learning, internships, apprenticeships, certificates, concurrent enrollment enrollment and all. I mean, it's not exclusive to any of these, so a lot of these transcend a lot of these, and so kids are earning certificates and college credit and getting apprenticeships and capstones, and so there's a lot that they can do in these different programs we're offering. At the middle level, we're looking to extend equitable career exploration to middle school level, and we can do that by providing access to our 7th and 8th grade students and creating programs that are explorative in nature, so to pique their interest and their curiosity, to begin to promote programs so that students can more deliberately plan some pathways as they get into high school. We can always focus on connections to today's career possibilities. There's the wheel that we offer in a lot of our middle schools, which also could help to attach onto career tech ed. And finally, as we've talked about earlier with the board, some summer or after-school opportunities as well. We can certainly take advantage of maybe some outside the school opportunities to help promote some interest. So I'm going to transition the final portion of our presentation over to Katie, who's going to really talk more nuts and bolts, and these are the programs that we're now going to be exploring.
So at the end of the visioning, we came up with about 10 academies that we would like to see over at the Technical Center. Some of them are already in existence, and it's just building them and making them more robust and filling in the needs that Mark and Joan have discussed. And some of them have been on that campus before and have been closed down, and there is a need in our economy to reopen them. And so I'll talk about that. And then some of them are brand new. They've never been offered, but because of today's economy, we see that there are job opportunities. And in looking at Naviance data from our students, we see there's a lot of student interest in these. And so we're proposing that these be opened. So in each one of these, there's a picture for each academy. And down at the bottom is a link. And when you open up that link, you will be able to see the classes being offered, the embedded high school credits that are being offered, the concurrent credits either at Front Range or the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs that are being offered, the internship opportunities that will be provided to students, and any national certifications that they can earn while in that class. You will also see all of the data. We put that there for you from the workforce data from Boulder County, as Mark and Joan alluded to. We have to, as a technical center, provide programs that allow a student to make a living wage, which is a middle-class wage, controlled through the state and then the federal government. That's what CTE is supposed to be doing. So we've included that for you in there. And then we've also included the Naviance data for you. How many students said they're interested in a career in this pathway? I'm going to wait a little bit to open that up to criminal justice. It's the easiest one to read for you because some of them are really long and it would take too much time. So if a student enrolled in the Automotive Academy, they might choose to take Auto Shop, which embedded is a technical math class. This is a 5-credit high school math class, which helps them meet their graduation requirements for math. If they decided to go into our cosmetology program, they would be able to earn credits in technical writing, studio art, public speaking, and business management. All 4 of those classes are required for graduation. They fill graduation requirements. So they're not only learning about the industry and the skills that they need for that industry, but at the same time they are learning soft skills around language arts in particular and finance that allows them to attain graduation requirements. In the Public Safety Academy of Criminal Justice and Forensic Science, they have the opportunity in a year to earn 9 community college credits from Front Range in the criminal justice pathway. If they decided to go into manufacturing through Welding 1 and Welding 2, they would be able to earn national certifications and compete with adults for jobs by earning the NIMS welding certifications. If they went into Computer Science Academy, they might take game and web application and be able to earn national certifications in Adobe Dreamweaver and Auto Flash. They would also be able to earn community college credits. The Medical Academy, we are looking to provide Project Lead the Way. This would be a new addition to our campus. And those 3 classes would allow students to earn CU credits through CU Colorado Springs for a total of 9 credits. Some new programs we're looking to offer would be early childhood education. This is in total partnership with Front Range Community College, and in 1 year they would earn 18 community college credits. They would also be eligible to become subs in BVSD for 1 year. They could get a sub license for 1 year, which helps with a partnership with BVSD. And they would also be able to do internship hours, 60 hours of internship in BVSD preschools. So we're really trying to start that partnership. In construction trades, we are looking to provide internships with Habitat for Humanity. We have been in contact with them, and they're very interested in coming in and working with a construction program and then moving students out to do some community service in their own community and see the fruits of their own labor helping their own community. And then the last one is culinary arts, and we are working with Anne on this one to try to provide internship opportunities for our students at the new central kitchen to advance their skills in the culinary arts. So I'm going to go back real quickly here, and I'm hoping you can open up that link. So this is an example of what you will find when you open the link for every single program. You will see the career cluster that we're addressing. You will see the program's name on our campus. It's an academy. You will see the classes we offer within that academy, how long they are. You'll see the embedded high school classes that they get credit for because they're coming to our campus for half a day. Sometimes it is hard to meet graduation requirements and do transport to our school. So we're trying to help with that. Plus, our advisory boards are telling us these are the classes they really want us to focus on, math and language arts and the soft skills. You will see how many college credits are available in that pathway, if they're available, and what credits are. You will see then the Boulder County Bureau of Labor and Statistics. This is what our decision was based on why this program and not other programs. And then you will see the Naviance request from students 912 for the year 2016 and 17. So in this case, 545 students said they were interested in a career which was a criminal justice pathway. That can be anything from a police officer to a probation officer to a social worker to a Supreme Court judge. Anyone would start in the criminal justice pathway. So that's it.
So we have allowed some time for any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much. Questions?
I had a question, but you answered it.
Oh, good.
Yay. Construction trades one, because I know that in conversations even with Rob, we were looking at the number of skilled jobs that are available now, and there's no way to fill them.
In construction? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would say with our community partners, that's the one they're most excited about opening up.
So I have a question from days gone by with which of these would require prerequisites of the Algebra 1 and LI 9?
All of them.
All of them, okay.
Mm-hmm.
That was the question.
Mm-hmm.
Because I had a parent contact me saying some of them don't require that, and I didn't think that was that a few of the courses.
The thing that I think that may be blurring is that we were able to add technical math. Mm-hmm. And so if a student would come with half of their algebra done, we have 5 credits of math that we're embedding into some of our programs, and so we can fill that.
So the prerequisite would be that they would at least have a semester of success of Algebra 1.
In those particular programs that offer technical math.
Other questions?
Good question.
Yeah, so just in addition to this just being awesome and the presentation being
Thanks,
great, is there an ask here? Like in terms of funding?
Your support. No, I think we just wanted to let you know where we're headed, and we were here a couple months ago and just saying that this process has been fruitful in how so many people participated in wanting, really wanting more out of current tech ed. And I think financially, of course, we'd like to have support.
Because you're adding 3 new areas, right? Which require additional funding. And do the other areas require additional funding as well?
They do.
Round them out,
they do. We have a little document for that, too, if you'd like to see it.
That would be helpful.
Construction trades alone is going to be a pretty hefty amount just to get it up and running.
What are some of the timelines? Did you go over that?
That's a good question.
Right now, we're giving, for the first time ever, every 8th grader is coming to our campus to take a tour. We're providing buses, and every school has signed up to come on tour, because, as Mark said, we want to start earlier. And then every high school will take a tour. They've done that for the past couple of years. And if kids sign up, we are in a position to definitely open up Project Lead the Way in our biomedical. That's 3 new classes. We're in a position to open up Project Lead the Way in computer. We're in a position to open up the early childhood education program. We're getting into a position in the Auto Academy to offer those certifications. There's a lot of training our teachers need to go through, but we're looking every program with the certifications to offer those. I think construction trades is still kind of up in the air, and the culinary arts will probably be down the road some, because it's kind of dependent on the central kitchen.
It would be our hope, though, if we could onboard construction in the fall. I think we have kind of a stratified approach, so we can walk into that program, get kids into the pipeline, but I think that is a that very high interest among us to try to do that, and among students as well. So we're pretty committed to looking at that.
And I do think your presentation was awesome, and I'm all for it, because one of my sons wouldn't be where he is if he hadn't done Cisco networking.
And he's an engineer. Nico,
So-
he's an engineer.
That's what led him to his path.
I have a question. What is Project Lead the Way?
So Project Lead the Way is a national organization. We actually have been partnering with them through Centaurus's engineering program. And it's in collaboration with CU Colorado Springs in Colorado, and it is a way to introduce students to a multitude of careers within a pathway. So if they take our classes, 3 classes we're looking to offer, they will be introduced to 150 careers in the field.
At the same time, earning college credit.
And earning college credits.
And if you want to get into the weeds, I don't know. They're different in the fact that concurrent enrollment wants the student to sign up for college credits at the beginning of the class. And with these credits, when the student is almost done with the program in late spring, is when they can decide whether they want to take the test and then would pay for it to get the credits.
So the student would pay, not
Right.
the district?
Right.
So is the facility set up for all of this?
We're working on it. So yes, in terms of the current footprint, everything that we've presented, construction will need a little nuance, but yes, we can get there. A lot of it is, as we look at the bond transitioning out of the building, Arepo campus will be recapturing more space, and so, like I said, we're going to stair-step into those. A lot of these programs, especially as we onboard them, will be in year 1, and as we get more kids in the pipeline, more kids come into the building, and as we recapture more parts of the building, we'll be able to offer them. So nothing that we presented to you this evening could not be presented, not be offered next year. We're able to go with them.
Any other questions? Great presentation. Should we do graduation?
Can I just say thank you? It was awesome. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, so we're going to transition to graduation. So I'm going to invite, we have, I think, all of our high school principals here this evening. So that's super exciting.
All of the high school principals.
Yeah, well, we have 3 or 4 presenting. So I'm going to invite the ones that are presenting to come up to the table, please.
So if you're presenting.
Do it.
If you need a bio break right now, this would be a good time.
Every 5 minutes, I need.
I'm trying not to look into the
Okay, well, you're here. Well, Michelle here.
That's a good move.
We can do it however.
That was a Jim Reed. I might have adopted it, but
Kurt first.
Okay.
And then Ginger.
Her.
yeah.
And then Dot, and then me.
Let's go too.
Or me and Dot.
There's that one. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, my dear.
Intermission.
I'm going to run.
That's his chords. Yeah, there's the. Yeah.
Yeah, my cable system is not the best, but it's better than like 4 cables across the floor on each side.
Well, and I think you're out of the room when I thank you for putting this all together.
Go BVSD!
Wow.
Panthers. Come on, James.
Is that mine or yours? No. It's yours. Where is she? I've got one more chair. What do you need?
Michelle is not present.
All right.
Careful with the cord. Don.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Where? Can you tell me where to be?
You want to
He's going to speak so much.
Oh, we're not
You know, I should have asked this.
Okay.
You ready? Okay, so just a very, very quick set. As you recall, we have new graduation requirements for our graduating students of 2021 and beyond. This evening, we have all of our BVSD principals here to talk to you about our the next component of this, which is our capstone requirement. And so I'm going to turn this over to Kirk Quitter and the rest of our principals.
Good evening, everyone. We're going to walk you through an update of the new graduation requirements, specifically our proposal for capstones. And I did want to recognize that all of the high school principals are here, including Neil Anderson from Monarch, James Hill from Boulder High, Dan Ryan from Centaurus, Carrie Yancer from Netherland, as well as all of us presenting tonight. So we'll talk briefly about sort of how we got here and the history of the updates of graduation requirements. We'll share with you our proposals for a math and English capstone, and then our communication plan moving forward, and then we've got some time set aside to answer any questions. So as you know, in September 2015, CDE adopted new graduation requirements, specifically requiring that all students demonstrate proficiency in math and English. And there are a variety of ways that they can do that. There's a list of assessments, most notably, that were adopted, but above and beyond that, we have the opportunity to adopt a capstone requirement. And here's a brief timeline of what's been happening at CDE. So 2015, those guidelines were adopted. Our 9th graders this year will be required to demonstrate proficiency under those new guidelines. And here's a timeline of what we've been doing here at BVSD. So you can see there's been a lot of communication out to our community around these guidelines. We've been sharing, high school principals have been sharing out to the community, as well as the board and superintendent as well. So lots of communication on this. And next steps would be adoption of our district capstone. And I think that's you.
Can you go back one?
Sure.
So while we're not going to look at all of the options tonight, because there are quite a few options, we're going to focus on the district capstone, but I would encourage you at your leisure to go to the CDE website, because it does list all of the options that students have to fulfill their graduation requirement for the state. That one's you.
Is that me?
That's you.
Okay. I thought that was you. Hey, one of the things we're going to do is we're going to offer capstone options at all high schools. Currently, there are some schools, Peak to Peak, New Vista, that do a capstone project already. But what we're going to be doing is we're looking at a couple different things: a portfolio of course selection performance, which aligns with the current practice of high school counselors. In this context, for the demonstration for English and math, because remember, this capstone is only for English and math, because we need to make sure that every student is proficient in both of those categories. And then schools may choose to broaden the capstone beyond the narrow purpose. The purpose, right now the purpose is to allow our kids to achieve graduation. And we don't want stumbling blocks. We want to be able to prove that kids know what they know, but at the same time, we don't want to have hurdles that are, excessive for students. Now, some schools like New Vista have a tremendous capstone project, and I think we're looking down the road to seeing if can we create other pathways within the other schools to have capstone experiences for all kids. But that's not the purpose right here. This one really is a very narrow focus to looking at graduation only. Capstone guidelines. Have you guys been given handouts on this?
No.
Okay, in that case, can we click on the here? Thank you. Using your X-ray vision, you'll be able to read that. Actually, the key is that second category down. Is there any way to make that any bigger at all?
Probably.
There we go. The capstone is the development and implementation of capstones in BVSD at the school level. It's looking at a portfolio of work, a public demonstration of learning, or an actual capstone project. But all three of those, whichever route a school chose to go, would include a reflective activity in which the student clearly describes what he or she has learned in those areas and how it would impact their future, whether that be going into the workforce, whether that be going into next steps in academia, whether it be going into the military, but how what they have learned in math and English has enriched their lives and made them prepared for the next step in life. If you can go back to the presentation. Here's a rubric or a sample rubric that we'd be looking at.
I don't have permission.
Well, you know what?
They don't trust you with anything.
We really don't trust you at all.
Yeah, they don't.
So the rubric is very similar to the rubric that's being used at New Vista. Is it woven within here?
I think there's a link.
Okay. Michelle will give you permission.
All right. Well, I need permission for that too. I'm requesting access. Sorry about that. They don't trust me.
We didn't really want to, have that aired in public, but it just slipped out.
Am I getting permission, Michelle?
What's the magic word?
But I think it's safe to say what we developed, we wanted to be broad enough that all schools could implement, yet still maintain that focus on math and language arts proficiency. So a student, they're going to be choosing from that menu of options to demonstrate proficiency. They may take the SAT and get a great score in language arts, but struggle in math. So this would be an opportunity for them to then go on, whether it's portfolio or whether it's a presentation, to demonstrate that proficiency. It's going to look slightly different at every school, but the end result in the rubric, we feel, could be implemented across the board.
Absolutely. Can you blow that up one more time for us, Mark? We'll just give you an example of just that first category. And it says, as you can look at it, we're looking at, do they meet or do they not meet? It's not a matter of exceeds or multiple aspects to a rubric. We're really looking at, does this student have a proficient understanding of math, a proficient understanding of the language arts standards, and can they demonstrate that either in a capstone or in a portfolio review or in a public demonstration? So to our best of ability as educators to sit there and say, yes, this student is ready to graduate. This student has met those markers. Because we know that not all students are great test takers. And so the SAT is one measure, but it's not the only measure. Mm-hmm. So this is another tool that enables us to be accountable to the state, to the school district, and to be able to quantify if a student really is competent in areas of math and language arts.
note too on the bottom that the capstone was, we pulled from New Vista, which we were super lucky to have New Vista in the realm of already practicing some of the capstone practices, I guess. And we looked at Roaring Fork and Jefferson County. So we looked at some different rubrics and kind of pulled the best of what we thought would work.
For the other school districts. And then the one last piece, under the implementation recommendations.
Holding my breath. There we go.
There we go.
Oh, see, we have So on this is looking that the student has some ownership within this process, that the student proposal process, they can say, I want to do a portfolio, I want to do a capstone, I want a public performance. We create the timeline working with the students. Now, we have to also be aware of this, is that looking at a true capstone experience, like they do at New Vista or at Peak to Peak, it could have a monetary aspect to it. Because one of the things you need to have is you need to have a faculty advisor looking at it. A portfolio review, we believe, can be done by the counselors already working at the high schools. But for the true capstone experience or the public demonstration, we probably most likely be looking at having teachers as advisors. So we have right there in the bold print that says potential fiscal impact. Compensation could be in a stipend or it could be an FTE. And then the final product and evaluation, as we go down the road, looking not just at the graduation component, but expanding it onward to make, changing out of our 220 credits into a pathway aspect of education. The potential impact there could be, again, looking at FTE or looking at stipends to pay people, looking at to evaluate the final products. Next slide, if we could. That's Kurt.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. There we go.
And now, how will we communicate this out? And that's Joe.
That's me. I think some of it's not how we will, but where we've been at this point. Again, numerous meetings at high schools. I think all the high schools or several of the high schools hosted both Spanish and English sessions. And then this spring we have a few that are set up to, again, kind of go through with our 8th and 9th graders what the expectation is or what they can look forward to with the capstone option.
So just to underscore that, we will be planning community meetings at all of our high schools, and we'll offer 2 in Spanish. We'll offer several in Spanish as well. So we want to make sure that every community gets this information, and we'll work in tandem with our middle schools as well to make sure that entering students have this information. This is the 3rd community engagement we've done at our schools. They're highly effective when we host them at our home schools as opposed to inviting them here to the district office. As much as we like to be here, people would prefer to be in their home schools.
Yeah, I'll just add one thing to it. We also had when we had those community meetings, we also held one at the Family Learning Center to accommodate some of those families that lived over there. And we had about 50 or 60 families showed up. So we'll reach out to the Family Learning Center to see if they can accommodate that as well.
Thanks, Jim.
Questions?
How are families of 9th graders dealing with the new change? Is there confusion? Does it feel too far down the road and they're really thinking about it?
I would say, I think the biggest thing is exactly the second part. It's just the transition going into 9th grade. It's
already transition
enough. I think as we hit 10th grade, I know that all the schools working through their counseling departments, working with, through seminar classes, through the ICAP process, are informing kids what's going on. We're going to get more information out to parents as we get a little bit closer to the
they don't choose this till they get to be closer to their junior year when they would take those standardized tests, right?
They would choose this after the standardized test. I mean, some at New Vista, Peak to Peak, they can choose right now.
Sophomore.
They can choose as a sophomore.
They don't have to take the test and fail. They could choose it.
They could.
They could. But since they're already taking the test, since everyone's taking SAT, we're anticipating that more people will be choosing after the results come back and we see. I don't think anyone would choose this as it's written right now if they've got those passing grades on the assessment. This isn't kind of the pathways style capstone. This is the opportunity for kids who might be struggling with tests to find a way to demonstrate math and language arts proficiency.
But
The hope that we get to a pathways kind of.
exactly,
Yes.
exactly.
And we don't want anyone to believe that this is like a stopping point. This is really the
Foundation.
the foundation, the low-hanging fruit to make sure that we can get kids through, because we want kids to succeed and not be hampered by, gosh, I couldn't pass the SAT. Well, but you are proficient in math, you are proficient in language arts, and we want to make you, able to graduate. Pathways would be a goal that we'd love to see in the high schools.
So if they did well in, say, math, but did not do well in language arts, could their capstone or presentation be just language arts?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
It
so
would only be in language
They can
arts.
mix and match.
You bet.
Having been involved in the audience of several capstone projects at CU, would it ever be allowed as a group project? Because all I've seen are group projects.
Yeah.
It's like,
I think in this iteration, we're really looking at that individual demonstration of proficiency in a very sort of narrow scope. Down the road, when this would expand into more of that pathway style, true capstone experience, that seems like it would be a natural progression. But right now, we're really tasked at looking at how can we help kids and provide them another option other than tests.
Two questions. Does the state have any plans to audit the capstones? So just to make sure that what we're deeming to be a capstone that demonstrates proficiency is indeed meeting the standards of the state?
As far as we know at this time, no.
Okay. And then the other thing is, how would a capstone connect with college readiness? We like to look increasingly at remediation rates when our kids are out at the college. Do we expect there to be a connection there, or do we expect it to be different than a remediation rate that we would see in, let's say, the test taking, not capstone population?
Mm-hmm. That's a really interesting question, Tina, and I think probably, I'm going to say probably, you all haven't thought about that so much because the purpose of this law was graduation.
Yes.
So first and foremost, we have to get kids to finish high school and then begin to look at the future. But I think that's an interesting question for the future. But this really is about getting through with high school. And particularly if you don't have the test scores that already put you at that point, it gives you an option. Because most kids are probably going to do it just with their test scores. And so this has to be an option for the kids who won't.
That's an interesting question to ask college admissions.
Yeah.
folks.
Yeah.
Well, the community colleges look at the math and the language arts. That's what they test on coming in for their basic classes. Yeah, the accuplacer. So
it might be good to be clear with families that this may not
Right.
replace a test
Right.
in terms of getting entrance into
I
something.
would, and again, all the high schools do a really good job of having a conversation with families. Like, I appreciate where, Kathy's question, like, could a kid choose? But if you are looking, saying, I want to go to college, you've got to take the ACT, you've got to take the SAT if you're planning on going, depending on the colleges. I mean, that's going to be one of the mile markers for you.
and there's still I'm sure there'll be modifications for the special ed.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually written in the law.
I know.
And I do think it's really important to remember that the state did this to increase the expectations in high school. And so what you want is for most kids not to have to do the capstone. You want the kids to be successful. So one of my questions for all of you is, in the registration process, are counselors really stressing with kids about taking the academics? I'm assuming they are.
Don, just as an extension of what you just said, so this is really for kids who probably plan not to go to college.
Well,
if they haven't taken the if they haven't done well on the test.
It's fascinating. I have a sister-in-law who couldn't pass the ACT. Test anxiety, couldn't do it. She's now a pharmacist at CU Health Sciences. So I don't necessarily think that it's only for kids not going to college. I think it's for kids who just struggle with taking tests. I think it
So
covers
they
all
might
gamut.
go to one of the colleges that doesn't require a test, for
Right.
example, one of those 800 colleges.
And again, that's also you look at even CU admission. It's criteria. It's strength of schedule, it's GPA, it's testing, it's letters. And it's not all, you got to be, they put all those components together, to kind of rate a student. Because some students may have really high test scores, but their GPA is not as stellar. And other ones have great GPAs, but the test scores are not great. So I think there is going to be some exceptions as we look at it, but I don't necessarily think it's only for kids not going to college. I think it's for kids who just struggle taking tests.
So what does a conversation look like if there's a kid like that who comes to you or one of your team and they have no idea what this is or what they should do? I'm just trying to think of some examples of capstones or how you would guide them to choose something that would work.
Well, right now, I would say that the lion's share of juniors take the SAT just like they did like they took the ACT. Because I think it's a free test. I don't have to pay for it. If I choose to go to college, I'm most likely going to need this. So I don't think it's really us coaching a kid saying, gosh, Kathy, I don't think you're going to make it on the test. Let's try capstone.
No, I'm talking about after the fact.
But after the fact, I think it's, Kathy, seems like you're struggling a little bit on this test. So let's look at some ways that we can prove that you do know your math. I think it's going to be the rare kid who really doesn't pass the test, who really doesn't know the math or the English.
Right.
And doesn't fall within an IEP?
I would say at just my school, at Alternative Ed, there's more and more students that are on the top end of scoring that just struggle with school. I have a student right now, I was talking to him earlier today, and he's from Monarch, and he finished his junior year, he's in his senior year, and he just needs to finish. I would love to have him work on a project like this. His plans are to go to college. His scores are stellar. But he's just having some other issues happening this year, and he'd be a perfect. And a lot of the kids that are alternative right now are kids that, for whatever reason, are struggling with the one-size-fits-all high school model.
So
that's an example.
Right, especially as we look at expanding the pathways model and expanding capstone beyond just this. I think that's what we're looking at. We're looking for kids that traditional school just is not the fit. But they are.
That'd be one example. Yeah, there might be other.
They're great students. They're going to be great contributors to society, but just sitting in class all day is just not doing it for them.
But I think, Sam, I hear where you're coming from. I think it's, okay, now what? What's the next step? If a student has not done well on the SAT and wants to do a project, we're going to need to be doing some training and guidance with our mentors to help support kids making those decisions.
But with your examples, are you talking waiving some attendance requirements?
I don't think so.
Okay.
You got to customize education.
Because you said that student's struggling to sit in class every day.
Right. Maybe. I'm not sure.
I think that first step would be the portfolio review. I think the first step would be, okay, if I didn't get the score in math, I could sit with my counselor and maybe pull some of those assessments where I did do well, where I did demonstrate proficiency, and use that as evidence then, and do that review with a counselor or two or a team showing, well, here are the standards, and I actually do have evidence that I've met those standards. So if we could do that, that might be enough at first go around of a portfolio review. And then if there wasn't the evidence, then that next step would be a little more creative, saying, for example, at New Vista, we have math problems where a student might spend 2 or 3 pages talking about their thinking on how they did this problem and possible solutions and why they chose one solution. So they could perhaps expand on something as simple as one math problem or look a deeper dive into a couple of the standards that they haven't met.
So, Kirk, too, wouldn't they choose, or don't they choose? I mean, I've seen some of the plethora of topics that your kids choose. I mean, it'd probably be career. It's what they want their career to be.
Sure. Our model right now isn't
like
the
a deep
proficiency
dive
model, but it's more kind of what you were asking about, Tina, tied to career and next steps and their path. But I think there's still a few takeaways as far as getting just that focus on LA or math.
just as a reminder, this is one of 11 different alternatives that are presented. So there are 7 testing options alone. So if they take the SAT or the ACT and they don't do well, they could take the other one. They could take the ASVAB if they're going into the military. The student who doesn't pass the free SAT administered during school time will have a whole menu of options that they can pick from, and this would be one of those options. They may want to look at taking a different test. They may want to look at taking the SAT over again and raising their score, and that's what we're really going to work with the counselors on. And I'll use this opportunity to introduce Tammy Lawrence, who replaced Andy Tucker, and as Andy left us to go to CDE. And you asked the question about them auditing our capstone. It would be Andy's department that would be doing that, and so I will reach out to my new friend tomorrow and find that out, and then I'll get back to you.
Thank you. And I would say, too, that the area districts are all working in collaboration together on district capstones as well as providing input to this. They have a February meeting, and it's all centered around capstones, so there's lots of collaboration and conversation because everybody's new, and this is new for everyone. And so how can we work smarter together in trying to troubleshoot some of the things that might come up?
What happens if a kid goes down the capstone path and doesn't work out? Are they so far down the path now that they're not going to graduate because they didn't pass their capstone, or are there still these alternative ways for them to get out?
Well, the testing is always available. I think the portfolio review.
So the portfolio review
it could still exist.
Would still exist right next to it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Because I really like the rubric that
Mm-hmm.
was up there.
Mm-hmm.
And I would hope that somebody was going along with them the whole time, looking at the rubric, not at the end saying, "Oh, you didn't do multiple drafts." Or something.
So as we talked about potential fiscal.
FTE. That's what I was going to say. I think you're light on your FTE because just having somebody at the end review it doesn't feel
right.
because
No,
these are kids that
that's why it says it could be a fiscal.
I know. I just thought you were being a little conservative on what this might take to implement it.
Well, because we don't know.
It's hard to know. It's hard to know how many students are really going to want this capstone option.
But I would think to make it as meaningful, you would want somebody involved from the beginning, and not just at the end.
And I think that's looking more at the creating the big capstone, the pathways. Mm-hmm. This really trying to narrow this down. This is really for the kids just trying to graduate.
Mm-hmm. And I get that. But I still think some hand-holding up front.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Maybe more so in some cases.
Excuse me. New Vista requires, or at least it used to when my daughter went there, a culminating project.
Exactly.
And that's the capstone you're talking about, New Vista?
Mm-hmm.
Because it was super comprehensive. It just didn't deal with language arts and
exactly. Right. So that's more, I think, of the sort of the expansion pathways model that we could build on. Ours is not focused on math and language arts, although it would have the potential to be so for some students who maybe don't have those test scores. But it's always been about career and life path, what that student, getting that student prepared for what's coming after high school and helping them better understand who they are and what their passions are.
Right. And then the committee that reviews that was a little bit more expansive than what I thought you mentioned. I think they had community
An advisor,
members
a mentor,
Right.
It's a robust system. It's changed a little bit, but it's still 3 to 4 people on a panel that those students are presenting to several times a year or several times throughout that process.
I always felt like it was a thesis being defended by the high school student.
In many ways, yeah. So this is much more narrow in scope. Ideally, I would love to see what we do be available to all students in all high schools in one iteration or another, but we're so focused with an advisory program that can hold that and just a curriculum that is completely aligned with that over 4 years. So I don't think we're ready to go there yet as a district, but we can start here and then find a way to let that grow.
I have a question. Do we know what percentage of students complete their senior year and don't graduate?
We do. Michelle, do you know the statistics were just, I want to
So
say...
it's embargoed until January 18th.
Oh.
And then it's 90 plus.
90 plus.
Graduation rate of 90 plus. 8%-ish.
So about 10% of kids actually finish senior year but don't graduate.
Or may not finish their senior
Well, that's what I'm asking, is kids who actually finish but don't.
You want completers.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not talking about kids who don't finish. I'm talking about kids who do finish 4 years but don't graduate.
Because they don't fulfill the credits?
Right,
Is that
because,
what
or
you're
they
asking?
can't demonstrate math and language arts.
Well,
they can keep
haven't
going.
been asked to yet.
Right, yes,
Yeah.
but yeah, they don't fulfill the requirements.
Right.
So they have like a fifth year
Well,
program.
what you have is you have two different. You have a graduate and you have a completer. So a graduate is a person who actually gets all the credits done in 4 years. A completer who gets all the credits done, but may take them past 4 years. It may take them the summer following or the year following.
Okay, so they can still stay.
They can still stay
till they're 21, right?
Special ed, and technically, I mean, but most of the kids can finish up in the next semester, or we figure out,
One
some
year.
of the resources
It's usually
that you
about
guys
1 year
do.
at the most. But the state figures 2 years, don't they?
Right,
They
but the
allow
state
for-
kind of looks at graduation rate as being, you got to get it done in 4 years, but not all kids do.
Okay.
And so I think the completing rate is probably much higher than our graduation rate. Although our graduation rate is really still pretty outstanding compared to the rest of the state.
Any other questions? All right, I think this is a great conversation, great presentation.
Can we do a commercial interruption since we have all the high school principals here and we don't ever have this opportunity? I'm going to turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Mr. Hill.
So actually, I would like to share just kind of a historical moment with you guys that happened at our last principal meeting back in December. We actually had all high school principals agree on something. The topic came up around cameras, internal cameras within the building. We had to discuss it.
It's a historical
So now you're going to know that I told you the truth.
Yeah, she told us at the last meeting.
So, and again, to all of our surprise, that we all agreed that the need for internal cameras within the building was definitely at the top of the forefront. So we figured since all of our high school principals was here, and Dr. Stevenson didn't put me up to this, okay, we just thought we would share that with you as well, that we all are in agreement that we are for and in support of cameras in the building. So.
Thank you.
And since you're all here, just speaking personally, I've come to appreciate how hard your jobs are. So thank you for your leadership of our high schools.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Don, what did you call it? A commercial?
It was our editorial comment that we don't. I mean, I've been a principal at Fairview for 14 years. I think this is the first time we've had every high school principal present working with the school board at one time. So for 14 years, this is landmark for us all to
So
be
do we
here.
have a picture?
We should be glad we didn't ask for more money.
Yes.
Does anyone need a bathroom break, or can we continue? Richard, okay. Bathroom break.
Might as well.
You're all here, and you want to see them before you put plans in.
They already have 2,000 cameras at Boulder.
Yes.
Can we take another bathroom break?
Oh. I think I mentioned this at one of the meetings, but
People ask me what I
Yeah,
they do. No, I mean not often. But one first thing I say is, hey, parent, the principals of the board. But I'm serious when I say my time on the board has deepened my appreciation for how critical it is to have a leader in every building. How things don't go off track when you don't. And I know that probably seems obvious, but to me, I just feel a lot stronger about it than I did before I started on the board.
I think especially put a lot of districts on
And we see when there's a leader who isn't, right? How shit can go off the rails. Yeah.
Bless you.
You're right.
See on the news about the guy that held his sneeze? So he had to be hospitalized for a month. And so it's not used their medical persons sneeze. If you have to sneeze, don't keep, and sneeze.
Kind of.
In the hospital, lost his voice for a week. So sneeze.
They all want it.
The one over there is easier to get over.
I reread it though.
There you go. Presentation on the screen.
Never happened. I thought it was 4 million total or something. Could be totally wrong. Sure. With the history, right? Do you want to have like 2 bathrooms at New Vista?
Oh, yeah.
One of my kids.
I know,
You're
going to leave that? Yeah, I'm going to start it. Okay, great.
Yeah. Just 1 year?
Actually,
I know, it's a danger zone over there.
Just hang a red flag on it.
I should have worn pants.
You can't really step over.
No.
This is a camp.
It's easier to go around the other way.
You got to go around. That's right.
Working on a solution.
Easily, he didn't.
We can walk
so
around.
that was
capable.
academic offerings were more limited.
We could try to jump
He
it.
felt like he wanted to be double high where the kids
Box
using something
jumping.
else.
Nice to meet you.
And he knows it. Although interestingly, his social circle was completely out of the school system. Not really. No. Do you want to impress your friend or just?
And my kids are not the kind of thing like
Go ahead. Why are we talking about this now?
It's nice.
Sorry.
All right, so we're going to have our first meeting on how BVSD will comply with HB 137, which is the distribution of mill levy revenue to meet the needs of students that was passed by our legislators last spring. So, Melissa, Cindy, Ben?
Let me introduce Melissa. Let's let Melissa go, and she can give you the background and talk to you a little bit about the thinking we've done so far. So, Melissa.
All right, so the three of us have been preparing for this meeting. I'm going to start. I'm going to give you a brief overview of the legislation, briefly, and then talk about what the options are. So the purpose of this meeting is to kind of frame the conversation, and then next time we plan on coming back and answering questions. So to the extent we can have some guidance, is the board interested in pursuing option 1, option 2, or option 3? All of them, are they still on the table? Then we can come back with more information. So to the extent we can get some guidance, and maybe we can't because you need to mull it over longer, but that's what we're hoping will come out of this. So as you know, this legislation passed after many renditions at the end of the session. The goal of the legislation is to ensure that students with like educational needs receive the same support regardless of which school they attend, whether it's a traditional public school, a district-run school, a charter school, or an innovation school. We don't have any innovation schools in our district, so we won't talk about that anymore tonight. So basically, the district's going to be choosing whether to develop a plan for using what's been defined in the statute as additional mill levy revenue authorized by the voters. And the statute says before, on or after June 2nd, 2017. So basically any time. So we're not talking about just future mill levy elections, but anything the district has already passed. The plan would be implemented in school year 1920, so 17-18, 18-19, things stay the same. The district basically is choosing whether to create a plan or not create a plan. And we talk about, and we'll get into the details with that. So if the district doesn't move in the plan route, then we're going to be looking at a percentage distribution to the charter schools of at least 95%. Again, that starts in 1920. The legislation, it's not, I would say, the model of clarity, as most legislation is not the model of clarity. So they kind of use a few different terms. They're using plan. They mentioned policy at one point. So we're trying to put this in a framework that makes sense with, it seems like, what the legislation was trying to do. So I think we've talked about this. We have a deadline for the board deciding, and so that's why we're starting the conversation now. The deadline is July 1, 2018. The board needs to basically have something posted on their website as to what they're doing. They've got some different language about what it looks like, but we do need to have something posted. Let's see. I think I already mentioned. So during this year and next year, it's basically a hold harmless to the extent we're already sharing with our charters. And so we're under a contract with all of them through that time period anyway. So we'll keep doing what we're doing. There's also a piece of the legislation that imposes an obligation on the charters to post more information on their website, or information, maybe they already do, about the waivers they already have from the state, some more financial information. And the legislation creates the shell of a fund for charter institute schools, but it doesn't actually provide any funding. So currently we have 5 charters, and I put the contract expiration dates in this handout. The legislation does talk about that any term of a contract that would require a charter to waive or forego any monies that are offered to them through this legislation would be null and void, unenforceable. And the legislation also says the district or the charter school may renegotiate contract provisions concerning services or fees for services as a material revision to the charter contract. So to the extent we're into the 1920, there's already a charter contract in effect, then we would have to kind of work through this piece. So what happens? We have to implement the legislation. We've got to look at what the board's decided to do and work through that. So I don't have any easy answers for that, but it's something we need to work out. So next, we'll talk about the options. So the option, I've just called them option 1, option 2, and option 3. Option 1 would be this plan distribution, and option 3 is the straight percentage distribution. Option 2 is the mixture of the two. So we're talking about the unrestricted mill levy revenue when you're talking about allocating through a plan. And so restricted mill levy revenue is something that the voters have already said in the ballot question, this is how the money needs to be used. So what might be confusing to members of the public is, to the extent we put language in a blue book question around a question about what we intend to use the money for, and we're following through on that, the actual ballot language in almost every case except for 2 does have some open-ended language and for any other educational purpose. So basically, except for transportation and this operational levy from last year, all the other questions that went to the voters had that open-ended language. So they would be, that money would be in the category of unrestricted mill levy money. So the revenues that we would be distributing through a plan would be for a program that benefits the school, all of the children in the district that could participate in that plan or program. So the word program is used in the statute, but it's not defined. So we've started having some conversations about what would a program be, and the way we fund programs and services at the district level, and the kind of things that could be included in a plan. So the statute itself does mention the top 4 bullets, And then that's picked up in this other language in the statute around policy, which we're calling kind of that hybrid. So the special ed, ELL, FRL, and the alternative education campuses. So that's specifically mentioned in the statute. They say, they use the word may, so the program, the plan may fund these, with the implication being that these are ideas that we, the legislature, like, but you might have other ideas. So the other bullets were just other things that we were just brainstorming about that are funded as kind of programs and services at the district level, and in terms of allocating and figuring that out, it would be something that would be, we could kind of put a dollar to. The other thinking was preschool, early childhood. So an example would be that was mentioned in the Blue Book as something we wanted to use money for, even though the ballot question ended up being an unrestricted mill levy collection. So different things for the board to think about in terms of questions that have already happened and questions if there are any other opportunities in the future to ask the voters. Schools and priority improvement plans, career and technical education. Again, that kind of concept of honoring Blue Book representations. Again, we're not recommending anything tonight. We were just brainstorming different ways this might look. So that's where you guys come in. So there's some obligations around identifying any administrative costs associated with this. Again, we're going to have to abide by any voter-approved restrictions. And there is an expectation in the statute that we implement and identify our plan on July 1 of 2018, but that we do review it. The statute says as needed. I think some of the thinking is this is going to be annually, maybe as part of the budget process. I think you mentioned some other ways to kind of look at that. And again, implementing in 1920. So then we'll stick with option one, looking at these other two columns. We tried to provide a little bit more information about. So if you're looking at the non-charter BVSD schools, there's some misperception that this money is going to kind of be backpacked in terms of the district students that are attending non-charter schools. And that's not the way that we do our budgeting and our funding. So it would basically be looking at district level programming to benefit those particular students that are identified if you were picking programs. The way it would work for the charter schools is that they have an option in the statute to either take that lump sum amount of, first you look at the number of students that could participate in that program. So say you looked at special education. You would look at the number of students in the charter school that were eligible to participate in the special education program. And then the school could either take the services that are associated with the district program, or the school could take a lump sum figure that represents the times the number of students that could participate. But they are supposed to use that money at their school to provide those services, so the special ed services to the students.
They could either buy those services elsewhere or buy them from the district.
Correct. Right.
Mm-hmm. So can I ask a question here?
Yeah.
So there's some here that have very few special ed students. A good example would be Summit. And if they chose to use services, should they have one student versus getting the money for that student, how would we, that seems like a big expense on services that you might send that way for such a small amount of student population.
The special ed department would allocate services based upon what that student needed. I mean, so they would do it just like the other schools. They provide the services versus the, if it were...
But just the time involved, the transit and all of that. Right. But we would not have an option to say, no, this is what you get. They get to choose?
Right. I think that's the way the statute reads it,
yeah. And so option 2 is this hybrid option where there would be a distribution through kind of a plan, but the way that this is where the statute gets a little bit different in the way it refers to a policy instead of a plan. So if you go in this kind of hybrid route, you're going to be looking at one of those 4 categories we already talked about. If you allocate that way, with any remainder doing this at least 95%. But all the other criteria are pretty much the same here.
You mean for the hybrid, so you'd say we want 50% of this money to go to special ed, and the rest of the 50% we're allocating 95%?
Yes. And then that last option 3 is the distribution, just a straight percentage of at least 95%. And then Bill can provide more information about how we're funding them currently, because we do 100% for almost all of them.
With a few exceptions of some of the older overrides. If the charter was in existence when we passed the override, they share in the per pupil amount.
Is it just justice now that doesn't get a full share?
There's a small breakout of a few other things. It's a long calculation, which we can share with you. We didn't want to overwhelm you with detail tonight, but we do have the total amount that, so it's $94 million that we collect in override revenue right now. And the charter share that we give out is $6.6 million of that, based on the 100% allocation. And then they do buy back services from us.
So the piece about, I'll just finish with a couple of the nuances with option 3, is we're still supposed to be looking at the voter approved. So, for instance, the transportation levy, does the school offer transportation or not? So this is the statutory scheme, in any future levy, say kindergarten or something like that, that wouldn't be subject to distribution to the schools that didn't offer transportation or kindergarten. Again, we're supposed to still post something by July 1, even if we're going to do the straight percentage. And the other piece is if we're looking at trying to, and this is where you have to really start to think about, do we want to try and keep the status quo, but that makes it a little bit more difficult because the statute it tells us that we're going to do this for all of our current charters and any newly authorized charters. So keeping that in mind, we've talked about historical practices, but this is a conversation that applies to all charters, existing or future.
Don't all 3 of these apply to future too?
But different than in the past when, new charter schools didn't share in our overrides was our practice, but now we can no longer have that practice because of statute. Now, all future charters would have the same benefits that the current charters have.
How often do we get a charter application?
It's been pretty rare. We know we'll have one for sure. We may have a second this year, but really it's been probably 10 years since we've had a charter application.
Pretty close. Yeah. So if we did option 3, what would change? Except for future charters, but what would change right now?
Well, right. And first, part of option 3 is a decision between 95%, somewhere between 95% or more.
Right.
So there's a decision
now
there.
We're doing 100%, right?
Of a portion of some of them.
Right.
Okay.
So we would true it up.
Okay, so we are doing 100% of some of them, and so we would do 100% of all of them that are unrestricted.
Yes.
And how much of that?
It's an additional 500,000. Is that right?
500,000.
About 500,000 to true up to what we're doing currently.
Okay.
Based on the current revenue.
Just a quick question in terms of the whole legislation, in terms of this, 1352, is it?
1375.
What were the legislators thinking in terms of getting this thing? I'm just curious because is it to give the charter schools, because they're part of the school district, right? We're given 100%, so they should be getting 100%. But was part of the thinking also around equity?
No.
No?
I know that part of it was there's some districts that don't share at all.
Okay.
So definitely motivating districts to share. Beyond that, I'm not really sure. I just wasn't really as involved in that.
I think there were some equity conversations, but I think the main purpose was what Melissa said. There are school districts that don't share.
If that language is in the legislation in terms of you may, for me, it looks like they were thinking about equity. When you're looking at special ed, ELLs, free or reduced lunch, alternative ed practices.
Can I comment on that? So because I testified against this legislation last spring and the prior spring, and the reason I did is because at the end of the day, I like local control, but there are a lot of benefits to this legislation, and one is really that we have 5 completely different contracts with our charters, and I don't think that's best practice that they're each so individualized as much as they're each a unique school that provides a unique experience for students. But I think in terms of financing, to have one set of rules for our charter schools is a good idea. And so I thought that was a good thing. The equity piece really came in at the last minute during the legislative session. So that was one of the compromises, is that there was some recognition that not all charters serve the same profile of students that the district serves. So these are levers that you might use to reflect or to, sort of balance out with the district. That was my impression of why that language was inserted. I believe it was at the very end. Mm-hmm. Is that what you all recall? I think so, yeah. And this is something that I think even Mike Johnston, when he had introduced the legislation the prior year, was someone interested as well, was this equity piece. And he was a really advocate for equitable funding with charter schools and did a lot of legislation around it. So that's like my 2-second piece.
So just to follow up on that, so then the plan could be that we could require charters to develop an equity plan or something like that?
No. This is just a financial.
So do you have a recommendation?
Not yet. But we would like the board's feedback, as Melissa said, on whether or not you're open to one of these is definitely off the table, or you want to pursue all 3 of these and what these might look like. We'd love to have your thoughts on this. I know it's new information and it's pretty complicated.
Can I ask 2 questions? One is, do we know what other districts are talking about, or have we heard of any? Very few districts are in our position, but what have you heard from neighboring districts?
Nothing yet. Have you heard anything on?
Mostly they're exploring all their options at this point. I mean, the districts are impacted very differently depending on how they have distributed the resources in the past or not, depending on how many charters they have or don't, and whether they have asked ballot questions very specifically. Some have included per pupil dollar amounts within the ballot language, so that puts a lot of constraints on what they do or don't do down the road.
And then my thought was always that we were going to have DAC reflect on this as well. Were we going to have them provide feedback after board provided feedback? Is that the intention? Okay.
Yeah, that was our thinking, is that I think they wanted to get a little more direction than, because I think you were there. We did present this in the spring. Richard might have been there too, just at kind of a high level, but it was
in connection with the DEA
yeah, so
draft.
I didn't think it was more confusing than helpful.
Yes.
So we thought we'd have a conversation with the board and then go back and then see how DAC's feeling about the 3 options.
So if we did option 1 and we chose, let's say we chose the first 4 bullet points, how would that affect the charters compared to how they're getting funding now? Because if we did that, would we be sharing with them only for those 4 things and not for anything else?
Well, I don't think we'd hit 94 million. We would get a good chunk of it. So I think you have here we go. It doesn't break out, but so I think special ed is around 37 million, and so it would be pieces of the 94. But we may be with just those programs, we probably wouldn't cover the full amount of the overrides. So the board could identify additional programs, or we could give out the additional revenue in a per pupil amount.
So is it Is it possible that if we identified those, it could reduce funding?
Yes, I think so. I think it's likely that some of our charter schools, if we pulled apart the $37 million for special ed and funded them on the number of special ed students they had of that portion of the money, it would be probably a reduction in funding.
Which I assume they wouldn't be interested in.
It depends on the school. We haven't looked at Boulder Prep and Justice High yet. It could be
There's some
a bit of a
schools that
wash
would
for them. They have higher.
Could get more.
Right. But we could run those numbers for you so you could get a feel for what that would look like.
That's kind of where I was going to ask for. I mean, I know it's a policy decision, but it would help me if I could understand through some scenarios with numbers attached the impact of the different options on our different charters.
It feels a little bit like it's just like the Goldilocks story. You know, when I look at these three options, the first option looks a little complicated. The second option looks a little restrictive, right? Because it's just those 4 areas and doesn't allow us to do anything else that we might like to do. And the last one feels about just right, you know. And to me, it just not fully understanding it like you do, but it looks like the third one is kind of meets our concerns that we've expressed before about how we shouldn't be given Summit, for example, kindergarten funding, right, or transportation funding. So this says we don't have to do that, right?
So that's a little bit more down in the farther than we've gone, but I think so. What you would be saying is we would do the continued funding now at 95 to 100%, somewhere around there, but we would peel off, for example, some of the things as programs. So, for example, the $5 million that we spent on early childhood, that wasn't in the ballot language, that was in the Blue Book language, but we can set that aside and say the $5 million is only for those schools that offer early childhood.
Right.
We could do something similar with transportation, because the way the transportation levy works is the transportation levy is for transportation.
Right.
So we get $7.3 million. We put that in the transportation fund, but we originally passed that levy in order to free up general fund dollars to do the computer replacement program. So we get the $7.3 million, we put it in the transportation fund, we spend $16 million on transportation, and then we give the charters their per pupil amount of that out of the general fund, and then we also fund the computer replacement, then we fund the technology fund. And so it's a lot of moving parts.
That's a good question. So with Shelley, what you were saying, with, like, let's say the $5 million for the preschool education, that was an informal earmark in that levy. Is that something, though, that would increase with inflation, or would we call it a percentage of that levy? Because that only applied to a point in time, but I think that whole levy has increased.
We would identify the dollar amount that's being spent on it, and that dollar amount would then be divide by the number of preschool students, the dollar amount that would be applied to if you have preschool students.
And then it could be a program.
And then my other clarification, just in case not all board members, I have spoken about this in the past, but my understanding is that so let's say there's a charter school exploring our district that's new to us, and we know there is one that is, and they open in our district, but they pull largely from Jeffco and Adams, which you can do, because you can have a charter school that's 100% students as long as it's contiguous. They don't actually have to reside in the district. My understanding under this is that we have to provide the full mill, even if none of those students reside in our district.
If that's the plan or a choice the board makes, once we put that on the website, that applies to any charter school.
Right, and that would be the only thing. I think there's a lot of room in here to find a good solution, but that's something I would love us to be able to push back on, because it seems so strange for me to ask my taxpayers to pay more money for a school that's not in district students. And that was one of the things I really struggled with this piece of legislation, was this was a locally raised revenue, and I know there's so many issues about that and the lack of funding at the state level, and that's why we do it. But it was never an understanding with our voters that we would be significantly funding students outside of our district. And again, I'm not trying to be territorial or nativist or any of those things, but that is one thing that doesn't sit well with me. Especially if you got into a really high percentage. You know, we have over our district, I believe right now, is 8% out-of-district students. I think that's a manageable number. Maybe it's 10, but a whole school would be I don't know. I feel funny. Does
And
anyone
there's-
else?
Yeah, no, it makes total sense, but,
Yeah.
I mean, isn't there something in, what can you do in the charter contract to limit?
Wait, nothing.
There's absolutely nothing.
There's nothing we
There's
can
no
do.
way you can even,
And I'd be willing to bet that taxpayers don't know that our district is paying to educate kids from other districts. I think they would assume that that district sends, money with the kids.
Well,
They do.
The child brings the state
Right,
money
right,
with
but
you.
not all of
the
it.
mill levy override.
Yeah.
Right.
Is there any way to get a sense of what our commitments were to our voters? We have here honoring Blue Book representations, and I don't think voters are going to
Yeah,
get
we're
the
putting that
difference.
together. We can give you, because some of the early overrides actually do have some specific language, which is the reason why we're.
I don't think they'll get the distinction that the language we wrote broadly, because at the time we believed that local control meant something. And so they'll remember what we said. So I would just like to know what those.
But I think we're trying to pull together the actual ballot language and the blue book as well.
That'd be great.
And there's no lever, so for instance, if a school does open in our district, but it's mostly out-of-district students, so it raises our taxes, there's nothing we can do to protest that, is that correct?
right, to protest what?
I mean, if we're authorizing, a school.
What if so right now, though, if we didn't authorize it, we have sole authorizing.
We have exclusive chartering authority.
So then so for instance, if we say no to a charter, let's say it was based on they couldn't get enough in-district students interested in the charter, then they would go through CSI. Is that how that then works?
They have to go to the state board. I think
They
they
could
go to the state
appeal
board, and the
to the
state
state
board can
board.
send them back.
Send them
to
back
you.
to us.
Okay, and then we would be then required to accept the new charter school, or how does that
You
work?
can send them back twice. At the third time, you're probably going to approve them. But you can send them back twice. You can say, no, we still have these same arguments, and no, we're not going to approve you. Then go to the state board again. And so when you get them back a third time, chances are you want to approve them. But what the important thing to remember about that is the contract provisions. State board doesn't get to dictate contract provisions. So the contract is really important at that point, what you're going to expect. And a lot of times in contracts, school districts will say you have to have a facility, you have to have this much enrollment, you have to have,
So do a conditional approval.
Right.
And
Is part of their application process, either way, state or here, dependent upon we have this many parents willing?
they have to demonstrate.
They have to
interest.
demonstrate it. But what you'll find is when you really start investigating, it's sometimes they aren't really valid people that are going to, they get signatures. So you can, when you do the contract, you can really require that. And then it's serious. I mean, in the application, you have to get, here are all the people who are interested. And maybe they are, but you really don't know. So
Doesn't it really just come down to the overall enrollment in the district too? So let's say a charter says, oh, we're going to take everybody in district. We know you're concerned about this. We're going to take everybody in district. So, and they do have that demand. So they pull all these people from other schools. But then there's all this other space in these other
That's
schools
right.
where they start bringing out of district people, and so you end up with the same problem anyway.
Potentially.
It would probably depend on the location. I think it would, there are some geographies that would really pull, I think. But central, I think, would almost get, we're such a big geographic area, so I don't know if it would always be true.
Well, I'm just saying, if let's say it's Summit, and everybody knows they have a good reputation, and everybody wants to be in their high school. So you're going to lose people from other high schools for sure, and there's going to be more openings to bring in outside kids. So you end up with the same problem. So it seems like the solution might be could a charter willingly give up their mill levy revenue and say, we want to be a part of this school district, we want to have a charter school, but we'll just take
It
the
would be
PPR.
unenforceable under the law. They can't give away what they're entitled to under the statute.
Well, that's what I'm asking. They couldn't do that in order to secure a charter with us.
No.
Specifically in the statute that they can't waive that right.
They can't waive that, right? It says that.
Where does it say?
Right.
You wrote it on there.
Right. We wouldn't be able to enter into a contract with them that them receiving anything less than what they're entitled to under the statute. It would be unenforceable.
Even if they willingly agreed to it.
Correct.
So, I mean, it just really comes down to whether you want to do any charters at all.
If you want to what?
Whether you want to do any charter at all, because you're going to come in, this is the problem it creates, right? It doesn't matter if it's charter A or B or C. Any charter is going to create this problem, where our taxpayers are paying for out of district kids.
Well, and I think it's not a black and white issue. We always have out of district, and it has always worked well. It's this really far out case. I don't think it's likely, but and we're having our own enrollment. I mean, we're going to see declining enrollment anyway, from what we can tell. So
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. So I don't. This is all new to me.
So under this, for the ones that are getting 100% of the mills they're getting, we could bump that down 5%. But then they'd be getting 95% of stuff they're not getting now.
And it would impact the charters all differently. So we can break that out for you so you can see, because it depends on. So, for example, Justice High would have an increase because they came in and after some of these mills. Some of the others would definitely see a reduction if we moved to the 95%.
So did any of you feel that this legislation, that these buckets were for districts to provide charters an incentive to serve these students, or do you think that was not one of the goals of this legislation? Because they call out very specific categories of students.
I didn't hear that, but like you said, it was at the end.
Right.
That may have been. I don't know. Did you?
I didn't hear that. I think the concern was more that there are different systems across the state in sharing charters, and I think Boulder Valley has been pretty fair. I don't know that that's true across the state, but I think it was an effort to say we're going to make sure everybody does what we want them to do.
What additional information are charters having to post now about their finances? Do you know?
I don't know. We'll get into the detail of that. I did provide a copy of the statute.
Yeah, I read the
But that wouldn't start until 2018, July 1st, 2018.
Anything else there yet? Are you additional financial information other than what we're doing, saying, yeah?
I think over time, this sort of thing, I mean, eventually parents will catch on, right? And some now already realize that we're paying for out-of-district students in Boulder Valley. But if this continued, I think it would be a disincentive for people to vote for mill levies at some point. So I wonder if the legislature has considered that, or if they care.
We do have out-of-district students in most of our schools. Yeah. And some at some fairly high percentages in addition to the charter schools.
What percentage of our kids are in other districts?
That I don't know. Tina was right. We do have 8% right now out of district. We did as of last year, but I'm not sure how many go out.
That was
get
in
that for you from
Glenn's
Glenn.
Presentation.
Yeah.
He had.
Did Glenn have that?
I think Glenn had that. He had our net migration out.
Tomorrow. It's the migration. Yeah, we can take a look at that. Yeah.
Those are kids that are just not here anymore.
Right.
They may not be going to another. They may have moved.
Right.
So he didn't have actually enrolled in another. He just had. Okay.
But we did have the presentation and the SPED kids that are considered out of district that we send to Denver or Maine or. Yeah.
I have a really specific question. At the last meeting, you mentioned that we pay $600,000 to collect mill levies. Mm-hmm. Is that a cost that's shared with our charters now?
It could be. Is it part of business services? We can look and see. We do.
Whether we take that off the top.
Yeah, in each one of the contracts, and you probably know this, we have some services that we require, basically charters to buy, and then others that they choose. So some choose to buy payroll services, some don't. And so that's the other side of this, too, is what kind of, it is a significant amount of money that the charters buy back services from us as well. But we can find out whether the $600,000 is in business services. Yeah, because that keeps going up.
I was stunned at that number. And then my other question is, we get some of our funding by a formula that has risk factors. Is that just allocated evenly? Do we backpack that out to charters, or how is that? Because we get certain numbers for FRL, and so it's just that same formula is then applied to each of our charters?
No, it's rolled into the total per pupil dollar amount that is then distributed out.
Okay, so currently a charter, like we get more money for a child who's FRL than not, correct?
We get $4.5 million for the at-risk component of the school finance.
Those dollars aren't attached to an individual child, though. They just give you a set amount.
No, it's based on the number of free lunch students that you have.
We don't send them with the dollars with the individual.
Correct. That $4.5 million is then added to the calculation on base funding and factors, and then that total is divided by the number of kids we have, and that's the PPR that's distributed out.
So then a charter school would also get a higher amount for an FRL child?
No. They get the same amount for every kid.
So why do we do it that way, Bill? I mean,
because we've always done it that way. And that's, if you look at the PPR number that is on the state website or any calculation, it's that number. It's that bigger number. It's added into the total.
Is the federal FRL based on the school that qualifies? For example, if we have a student at Boulder High and they're on FRL, we might not get the federal dollars for them because they're not at the school that qualifies.
That has 40%. Like it's not a Title I school.
Right.
So
Title I.
So an FRL kid.
Yeah.
Title I is separate from this.
So, I mean, I think we talked about this once before, and I just, even then I was puzzled, like if some school has 30% FRL kids, why wouldn't that percentage of our $5 million we get for that be allocated to that school?
Yeah. That would be a question.
There's no requirement to track it that way, and when you start breaking it down and tracking it, it takes more effort than you can just allocate more resources, and allocating more resources.
We do differentiated funding. It's just not for a pupil like that.
Yeah.
So and all schools get the same amount based on how many kids they have. We look at the need.
Well, that is the need. The number of kids they have.
So does that school get reimbursed for that, for those kiddos?
Only if they're Title I.
Not necessarily.
Right. So, but our district doesn't give that principal a little more money for.
Here's what you have to think about. Money that comes in for at-risk, you really need to think about what's going to make a difference. And if you start just kind of giving a few dollars to a school, it's probably not going to make a lot of difference. So you really have to look system-wide. What kinds of structures and programs do you put in place that are really going to make a difference, and then which schools do you serve? Whereas if we just distributed it on a per-pupil basis, I don't think it would have much impact. And so you really have to think about programs and structures and systems. And that's what districts do with the at-risk dollars. Now, it may be that you decide certain schools should have additional staffing, or certain schools should have after-school care, or whatever it is. But if you just kind of distribute it, you're not going to get differences made. You really have to think logically about what programs actually make a difference for kids. And you may have to put more money in a certain program or place and not distribute it.
But you do have a few schools that are more impacted by the FRL.
Absolutely. And you really have to be thoughtful about that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you can use money to create programs and structures like you're describing at the district, for example, like build up a really robust special ed program or something.
Yeah.
And then allocate enough money for the schools to buy those programs and structures back.
That would be a structure you could set up. And unless Bill knows something more recently than I do, there is no, your at-risk dollars, there's no requirement about setting it with the child or putting it in particular schools. You really have to look at your system and say what's going to make a difference. So you could do something like that. I think the tendency is to say, where do we have extra needs? where are the greatest needs and where should we invest these dollars.
And that's what I meant, Shelley, when I said we don't give every school the same amount of money. Because a kid at Mesa doesn't get the same amount of funding as a kid in a different elementary school that might have higher needs at school.
Well, if they're Title I, that's true.
Title I's different.
They
Title
automatically get extra money.
Title I dollars are federal.
Right.
Yes. Those come from the federal government.
I know that. So,
And we mostly fund schools on FTE. So some districts say, okay, Bear Creek, here's your $6 million. Hire your teachers, buy services from the district. We instead say, here's your 25 FTE, hire the best people you can. We don't say, because sometimes when districts are given money, then they try and hire the cheapest teachers they can get. Instead, we use average teacher salaries. We say, here's your 25 FTE, here's your additional resources here. And then at the title school, it might be, okay, and then you have this additional FTE from the title funds. And so we're really more FTE based. I mean, is that how you would describe it? And programmatic based, rather than giving individual dollars. And we don't do backpack funding.
What are the other risk factors we earn money for? It's at risk, and what are the other?
ELL.
ELL.
As a categorical funding, within the School Finance Act, it's only students' free lunch.
Free lunch.
It's just FRL.
Special ed.
That's a category.
It's just free. They don't use reduced, just free.
Right.
Yeah.
They might add reduced in the new superintendent's formula.
Yeah.
But I would argue that 6 or 7 schools have the highest concentration of your FRL. Yeah.
8, actually 8. I'm going to look at Sandy. She's busy. But I think it's 8 schools have the highest concentration.
But then if that money is distributed throughout the whole district, but it's those schools that have those that are generating that revenue.
Mm-hmm. But also remember, a lot of those schools have their title funding, so they already have significant. Well, not significant.
But we don't want to go there.
Nice extra dollars, but yeah.
But the at-risk dollars are actually general fund dollars. That.
Yes.
So do any districts distribute their at-risk funding to charters differently than we do?
They probably, I think.
Well, there might be some. I don't know of any off the top of my head. There was legislation that was proposed more than once to do that, to make it a separate calculation, and it's failed sometimes.
And the new superintendent's formula goes into a bigger backpacking philosophy, I think. I mean, that's something that I think it's like.
It's, I don't know if I would call it a backpacking philosophy, but it's more of funding the student characteristics of individual students, but you're still funding a district.
Right.
So
it's just something I'm cognizant of as we sort of go through this process of what the future might hold for us.
It's pulling in the categorical funding, special ed, ELL, talent and gifted, and saying each of those students have different weights as part of the funding formula rather than this two-step thing that exists now.
But still not by school, it's by district.
No, by school.
Did it ever come up in your experience that we would wait by categorical funding? It was just too complicated to do.
Wait.
The at-risk funding.
Backpack funding, categorical or at-risk.
For charter schools?
Yeah, and across the district in general for all schools.
We receive revenue for a host of different programmatic allocations, whether they're categorical funds or per pupil revenue or minuscule interest earnings. That is just all revenue to the district to fund whatever programs are decided to be funded. There's no very little tracking of a revenue to a specific expense. Medicaid is one of the very few instances of that. The federal dollars, but we don't try to track a dollar coming in to a dollar going out somewhere because that's astronomically difficult to try to track that.
And as a general rule, we spend more than what we get. So how much do we get for special ed? And we spend $37 million. a very small percentage. 5 million.
5 million, I think.
And the rest of that comes from the general fund. So, as a general rule, we spend more on each of the programs and populations than we get in funding. All of them, maybe, tag, maybe.
No, all of them we spend more than we get.
Yeah.
A fraction of what the categorical reimbursement is.
So, Melissa, what do you need as we... You need them just to be aware.
Which options do you want us to explore further, and what information do you need to decide whether to go a plan, a hybrid, or a straight percentage? And if a percentage, what amount?
How it will impact the schools, charters.
The existing charters.
I have the scenarios that Sam asked for, so that's one.
Yeah, that's what I'd like to see too. Is if you, let's say peak to peak is getting this much. If we do option 1, they'll get this. If we do option 2, they'll get that. Option 3.
So the full plan route is a significant amount of work to try to figure out that impact. We know it will be an impact, and so...
Or even a relative impact, like...
Wouldn't you have to identify?
If we pick, so for example, special ed, ELL, if we pick some of the programs.
So,
as an example.
Yeah, that's true. We would.
Right. So the special ed one is probably the most difficult because you wouldn't say just special ed in general. You would say intensive programs versus general special ed versus administration, and have to break all that out, break it out on a per pupil basis, break it out by what the students are in each individual school. So not that it can't be done, but it could be a pretty significant amount of work to...
So by tomorrow?
You'd have to do that for option 2, too, right?
Absolutely.
Right. Either way, so there's not enough programmatic separation on specific groups of students to add up to the total amount. Special ed doesn't get there. Even adding an ELD.
There'll be some left over.
So let me turn the question around, because we could be here all night trying to figure out what needs to accomplish. So I'm going to turn the question around. So Bill and Leslie and Melissa, what's possible? If they don't feel they have enough information, what's possible that you can do in your world and get done and will help them get some?
The percent allocation is relatively simple to do.
Okay.
Because that doesn't require digging into anything to figure out what kind of students are what and where are they and all that. If there's the option of going down the programmatic route, we can certainly make some estimates of what those impacts might be, but know that they would be within some range of accuracy, depending on what the turnaround time is on this, too.
Okay. So I think what you're saying is you could run some scenarios, but you're not guaranteeing 100% accuracy, which I think is fair.
On the programmatic
stuff. On the programmatic piece. Is that okay with everybody?
Mm-hmm. Then can I ask another question?
Of course.
So,
you're the board chair.
I defer to you.
So this, I think, is a lot of information, and there's a lot of questions around it. And I'm wondering, and this is going a little bit on a limb, but if board members want to spend time with staff and talk about
There's such
this,
fun people.
is if anyone, if that would help people to understand more about it, especially if you're new to the board, perhaps, or
I'd like to
learning like I am.
Protect staff from saying the same thing over and over
Yeah.
again.
Okay, so
that
do we
would
want
be
to
my
have
worry.
another work session then?
We can do another
could.
work session.
Let me just throw this question out there. I think by the overall, just glancing at this, Boulder Prep and Justice High, what I want to know is how will this impact them, because they have that biggest at-risk population. And so I think that was where a lot of us are going with the questions of what percent, how will this impact them, not specifically dividing it up into programs, but just looking at that at-risk population, what kind of dollars would they get or not get? And would that allow them to continue to operate as they are or question services they're going to provide?
And the other variable is the size of the charter schools. I mean,
Yes.
just as high as fewer than 100 students. So
Yeah, and
when
I
you
think
talk
Boulder
about
Prep
impact.
too.
So that goes back to, you could allocate additional dollars to justice, but is it enough financial support to even make a difference? Those are the kinds of things that this, the size of the school makes a difference.
But I think one I think Justice is the least funded school, so they're going to be ahead, I think, regardless.
Probably so.
Right, so I think that's right. They're the only one who does not get the transportation.
Well, it depends on how the programs sort.
They're not the only one, but
Right.
and Boulder Prep are the ones that don't.
Right now, they
Historical
both select
ones.
services, so we provide services.
Bill, are you good? Do you feel like you can create something?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll talk tomorrow.
Can I ask a question? I would be fine to have some parameters that we start with the programs you've identified rather than trying to, is that okay?
So for the most
For the-
part, we don't have a program that funds poverty status. We have language, we have special ed, early childhood, not poverty. So there is no program.
I was just trying to put
Well, no, I'm just saying that don't expect that. When we talk about at-risk, the at-risk funding in the School Finance Act is for free lunch kids, and there is no program for free lunch kids, per se.
And I want to make sure I'm crystal clear, any new charter school would take funds from every school in the district. Is that correct?
Not necessarily, right? Because
if you're going to,
you're going to dilute.
You're going to dilute your funding somewhat.
only with one of our mills. So only our operating mill, right, is a fixed amount of money, and all the other ones, we pay them more money by increasing the taxes on our base. Is that?
Well, only if we have new students. So if it's the same number of students
Yeah.
divided over
You're
more schools, it's like when we brought
dispersing
Meadowlark on.
Yeah, if
Right.
you open a new school,
You have
to fund it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, but it would just be moving the fund.
Right.
But if you add new students, you do dilute one of our mills.
Right. But let's say just with the students are constant.
Okay.
Just, we would be moving funds from other schools. So some schools would lose in order to have a new charter unless there were that many more students as the charter wants to enroll, and they were all in district. Is that correct? And that's
Well, out-of-district kids bring their state funding with them.
Right.
So you
Not their
have
mill
that
levy.
funding.
So you're correct if you're talking about the mill levy.
Yeah.
What's the percentage Justice High gets right now?
Well, they get 100% of some of the levies and 0 of the ones that were
Right.
passed when they weren't here. So 2005 and forward they get?
I don't remember
We'll
specifically,
go
but
back
that'll
and
be in all
look.
the
Okay.
detail.
We can get that for you, yeah.
And this isn't a mill levy question, but I've often wondered why we don't deduct out from the PPR we give to charters the amount they get for capital, because they actually get more than our traditional students. They get a PPR allocation for capital, for facilities, that the traditional schools don't get. And I know other districts deduct that out of the amount that they give them in the PPR, which was just a conversation. And if I'm successful with the legislature, that amount could go up for them.
What other questions or concerns? Do we think at least one more work session and then deduct?
At least.
At
I
least.
just want to say thank you. This was really
Yeah,
helpful.
it was very
helpful. Thank you.
So we'll plan another work session. I think there's one on the agenda. When is it? It's
Tina, when's it supposed to go to DAC?
what?
When's it supposed to go to DAC?
Well,
After.
Not until you guys give some sense.
So we don't have a time frame?
Not yet, so we can get on the agenda.
That's not going to be a problem.
I just wanted to make sure.
so I have the next work session actually as March 20th. But that doesn't seem. It seems like we'll have to put that in February. Does that or?
Well, yeah, because what happened, I think you're interviewing
We need to
candidates,
be
so that took up one of the work sessions. And
Right. When do we start
next week?
So we started the interviews on
agenda setting, the draft of budget.
March 2nd is the first round.
Oh, great.
The poll is presented on February 20th.
I can print this out.
Right. So February 20th, because that's so we're the
So yeah, February 20th is the first one, and then we'll complete the interviews by March 10th. And all those dates are on our agenda. That's at the end of each one of our meetings on board docs if you ever need to reference it. So just so you know, I shared that with the District Accountability Committee last week so that the DAC can always find out what we're talking about. Get these things to go.
Great.
So yeah, so this sounds great. So if you have follow-up questions, do you want to email Cindy, and maybe we can just keep a running log of questions and comments and
yeah.
Okay, it's a
As
lot.
you think of questions, let me know.
It's a lot.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. So this is we're not adjourning. It was a work session.
Thank you, guys.